It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
About the current state of affairs, the fun never stops in the planetary asylum. If you're willing to face very bad but necessary to know breaking news head on, you're on the right broadcast. Dozens of diverse, breaking, brutally bad news headlines in a moment. And yes, it is far worse than almost any yet dare to believe. It takes courage to face the gathering storm head on. It takes courage to clear the lens through which we see the world. It takes courage to stand against the rapidly rising sea of insanity and denial, which is epidemic on all sides of the orchestrated political divide. From most mainstream media sources, the doomsday clock just moved closer to midnight. Here's why atomic scientists think humanity is closer than ever to destroying itself. That part's certainly true. Scientists said nuclear risk, climate change, biological threats, and advances in disruptive technologies were to blame. First, the so-called scientists moved the clock only 1 second more toward midnight, 89 seconds left, according to the nuclear scientist. And this gesture from the atomic scientist is nothing short of a cover-up for how close to impact we actually are. And what massive piece of the puzzle fits completely into this entire equation, but which, of course, no so-called science source dares to mention? Look up at our geoengineering jet aircraft dispersion filth-filled skies that all too often look like something from a Vin Diesel science fiction movie, and the majority of the masses, even now, remain eyes wide shut, completely clueless. About the metaphorical 89 seconds to midnight on the doomsday clock, let's put our actual situation into a real mathematical equation. If the entire history of Earth was compared to the timeline of a week, each day would equal approximately 660 million years. In this timeline, the human race has laid waste to planet Earth in 1/40th of a second before midnight on the last day. How long does any rationally thinking individual believe this trajectory can continue without total collapse and planetary omnicide? And this outcome isn't even taking into account the nuclear war on any scale, which could end it all in the blink of an eye. Could happen tomorrow. From the Irish Times and other sources, an ominous year. The climate change omens look dark indeed. That's the headline. No mention of climate engineering. No surprise. Yes, dark indeed. And where have I heard that before? How about a decade of it on this very broadcast and another decade before that during interviews on other platforms? What's so dark? Let's keep going, and as we do, all I'm asking, all I've ever tried to encourage is an honest, objective investigation of facts. And about all the coming bad news headlines in this broadcast, climate engineering, aka weather warfare, is inseparable from the equation on all fronts. From extremetemps.com, preliminary global temperature anomaly shows that January 2025 will be the warmest January on record. How can that be? Most people would say, we just had a blizzard in New Orleans and Florida and Texas. I'll get to that. The most above average country is Belarus. The most below average, the United States of America. To be more specific, the eastern half of the lower 48 states. Not coincidentally, where most Americans live, and not just this year, but all the way back to 2012. Since 2012, the most consistently anomalous, less warm region in the world is the most populated eastern half of the contiguous 48 states. So consider the empire with by far the biggest military machine, the empire with 3 times more jet tanker aircraft than all other global militaries combined, has kept its majority populations under a canopy of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding, which in turn creates a cold, dense layer of air that settles to the surface. The longer these operations are continued, the colder it gets, along with many various shapes and sizes of chemically frozen materials, from softball-size hail to cotton ball-like so-called snowflakes to styrofoam-like balls and much in between. Welcome to chemical ice nucleation winter weather warfare. Next from the Washington Post. As the U.S. shivered through the polar vortex, one state was unusually warm. They then say, it's been warmer in Alaska than in 36 of the lower 48 states. Stop and consider that data. Warmer in Alaska than in 36 of the lower 48 states. How many had any idea whatsoever that the Arctic, not just Alaska, continued to spiral into meltdown while Matrix Media was busy sensationalizing the chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding blizzards in Texas, New Orleans, and Florida? And before that, the lake effect snow generated from the record warm Great Lakes that they pile up in a few small select locations. All of this is part of the bigger picture agenda for the controllers and the climate engineers of look here, don't look there, don't ask any questions, and certainly don't look up. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it. And in the coming weeks and months, the reality of that statement will become increasingly evident. This broadcast brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness, that's the only way forward in this fight. Please see the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org, the activist suggestions link to find out how you can help us to move this fight forward. We must reach a critical mass, starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Credibility is key. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on this most dire subject can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Our super high-quality, color-printed materials we pass on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. There's no politics on our pages, no advertising, simply a mission to expose and halt the insanity in our sky while there's still something left of our planet's life support systems to salvage. Please help us to sound the alarm. Moving on. So where do the climate engineers plan to engineer chemical cold winter weather mayhem next? From Fox News, will it snow in Seattle this weekend? Question mark. What has been scheduled and what is starting to occur is the drifting masses of heavily aerosolized Pacific moisture into the Pacific Northwest, and at least the scheduled weather was for chemically frozen material to fall all the way to sea level from far northern California to the Canadian border. And again, so often now you have a cold side to a so-called winter storm and a warm side to a so-called winter storm. Since when? And so often now, snow levels have nothing to do with elevation. You either get snow on the cold side or you don't on the warm side. Doesn't matter where it is. Doesn't matter that places that just had record cold right before they had record warm are now back to record warm. The northern Midwest states and so forth, breaking some records by as much as 13 degrees, breaking the all-time former records for those days by 13 degrees where it was just record cold. Doesn't that get anybody's attention? What does it take? Does the sky need to be on fire? Because for some it seems it would take that, no matter how hideous our skies look. Some even look up and say, oh, look how beautiful that is. No, it's not. It's not beautiful to see a sky full of toxic particles and chemicals and pretend it's normal. It's truly impossible to digest what's unfolding. It's going to be even more impossible to digest 8 billion starving people on this planet. So again, about what's going on in the rest of the world while we're being shown nonstop either political circus or sensationalized New Orleans blizzards. Next from Barron's.com. Less snow, warm January weather breaks records in Moscow. Didn't hear anything about that on mainstream televised Matrix Media, did we? Reports says past days breaking all-time daily temperature highs. Thermometer readings have not dipped below an April-like 3.8 degrees Celsius. That's about 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Much higher than the historical average below freezing. There you have it. If residents in Moscow or Alaska, again, also warmer than 36 of the lower 48 states, if they want to get in on some chemical flash freeze, engineered winter weather blizzards, all they need to do is catch a flight to New Orleans or Florida. And for the record, while the blizzard flakes were flying on Florida beaches, regions of Greenland and Iceland, along with, again, Alaska and Moscow, Siberia, all these regions well above freezing temperatures with rain, while there was a blizzard in New Orleans and Florida beaches. More from AP News. Russia comes in from the cold with flowers blooming around Moscow in January. From the report, even in Siberia and in many places across the country that spans 11 time zones, it's been unusually warm, not unlike elsewhere in the world, because most of the world is warm, as I stated so many times over so many years. Yes, the rest of the world is in meltdown, and when any source fanatically claims otherwise, know that they have done no objective frontline research and are thus clueless, or they're lying. Take your pick. And it's no coincidence that the same disinformation sources generally deny climate disruption operations. It's just jet exhaust, they say, which is a blatant lie. At geoengineeringwatch.org, we have up-close film footage of jet aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible turning on and off. End of debate. It's a sprayed dispersion. Period. It's climate engineering, aka weather warfare. The AP report continues. According to Europe's climate agency Copernicus, the first 27 days of 2025 globally are the hottest first 27 days on record, dating back to 1940. That's when record keeping began for this region as a whole. So again, it would seem if you want cold, snowy January winter weather, complete with official blizzard warnings, you need to be in New Orleans or Florida. Welcome to covert climate engineering, chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding operations. These are patented processes. View those patents under the Engineering Winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. This is engineered winter weather warfare. We can speculate on all the agendas and objectives, but the fact that these occurrences are absolutely not natural is undeniable. And so many can't seem to get past the question of why. And why can't they get past the question of why? Because they haven't bothered to do any objective investigation without bias and preconception. And this is easier said than done because we all have these barriers. And to investigate on the true severity of unfolding planetary meltdown, and thus, if they don't do this investigation, they don't have the puzzle pieces to form an answer to the question of why, or at least one of the whys. Again, to confuse and divide the population as to the true state of damage done to the planet until the last possible moment, the moment before impact. And we are perilously close to that moment, by the way. To elaborate a bit further on one of the primary objectives of why for winter weather warfare, when Matrix Media can and does super hype the never before recorded blizzards along the U.S. Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida, those that have so far chosen to view the world through a completely colored lens, a lens tainted by power structure, propaganda, and programmed ideology, and peer pressure to conform and deny, far too many then choose to keep believing that the unfolding and accelerating abrupt climate collapse is just a hoax, right? Who cares if mountains of frontline data prove that the planet is in full meltdown mode? It can't be true because there were just blizzards in New Orleans and Florida, even though it was far warmer in Alaska and Siberia and Greenland and Iceland and Moscow. The weather terrorists have also whipped up snowstorms in places like Saudi Arabia and over the pyramids, and then those storms are sensationalized as much as possible, just like New Orleans. Many in the climate engineering denial camp also push the narratives of global cooling and coming ice age, and for them, they don't care that the engineered winter weather events in New Orleans and Florida and Saudi Arabia and the Egyptian pyramids were completely chemically ice nucleated, because for them, it's just a sign of global cooling. Exactly the conclusion the climate engineers and the controllers want them to believe. They don't care that it was engineered completely, top to bottom. Toxic snow, literally. And about the climate engineering reality, In the mind of one operating from ideology and not from frontline facts, climate engineering can't be true to them, right? Because so-called official sources with their bought and paid for or gag-ordered so-called experts say it isn't so. The experts tell us that we aren't actually seeing what we're seeing in our skies. And besides all that, there's this. How many are still clinging tenaciously to the mind-numbingly apathetic mantra that if they just keep thinking happy thoughts and continue going about their lives as if nothing's wrong, everything will magically turn out fine? My question is, how's that going so far as we circle the drain, literally? In the coming weeks and months, the absolute peril of eyes wide shut denial will become ever more clear. Wait and see. And for those still clinging to the false belief that any political puppet actors are going to save the day, think again. The climate engineering assault continues to rapidly worsen, no matter any election results. That's only smoke and mirrors. We're the ones we've been waiting for. If a course correction can yet be achieved, it's up to us. Forgive me if I rant just a moment longer. Many headlines coming, and they're not good. Unfolding and accelerating global ecological collapse is being further fueled by weather warfare operations, which have also all but destroyed the ozone layer, based on our readings with a former NASA contract engineer who metered UV radiation with equipment supplied to him by Geoengineering.org. He passed away only a few months ago, but at that point, his estimate was that there was about 30% of the ozone layer remaining. We are perilously close to a functional collapse of the ozone layer, which by itself is an extremely near-term existential threat. Again, climate engineering, the core causal factor, not hairspray cans. There are other sources of damage, I'm not denying that, but what's the elephant in the room here? Geoengineering, obviously. Does direct unobstructed sunlight now feel ever more intense on your skin and on exposed surfaces? That's only because it is. The DNA-damaging spectrum of UVC radiation is now reaching Earth's surface, killing flora, insects, killing plankton, causing cancers. The list goes on. And this caveat must be stated for all those that continue to falsely blame all the planetary damage on climate engineering alone. That's false. Here's the truth. The human race, taken as a whole, has completely decimated and overrun the planet and the entire web of life in the geologic blink of an eye. As a whole, we have radically overplayed our hand, and the debt has now come due. There are so many forms of human-caused damage to the planet and the climate that it would take hours to even scratch the surface of covering that subject. All that being said, if by our collective efforts we can fully expose and halt climate disruption operations, which are preventing the planet from responding to the damage already done, while simultaneously inflicting even more damage, and if we're still standing at that point, we can then focus on facing and prioritizing halting the countless other forms of human damage to the planet. But we must start with stopping climate engineering, the biggest single hole in the bottom of the proverbial boat. If we all agree on that, then we can build bridges and not burn them. Let's focus on that biggest hole in the bottom of the boat first. Moving on, another from extremetemps.com. Historic winter warmth in Europe. Hundreds of records smashed in all Central and Eastern European countries. Think about that. Do we see a word about that on U.S. matrix media, on the climate engineering cover-up sources like Weather Channel, Weather Nation, Weather Central? Nothing. And that's exactly the plan. Next, record January heat in India, Africa, Madagascar, the list goes on and on. In the land down under, Australia, record heat, firestorms, and floods. In South America, this headline, quote, endless record heat in Ecuador. And this, exceptional heat in the Caribbean. 100% of the tropics keep destroying every record like never before. Do we see any of these headlines on Matrix Media showing us blizzards in New Orleans and snow on Florida beaches? Now, this truly alarming and ominous headline. Heat flux forecast to enter Arctic early February 2025. The report states that could raise temperatures to levels more than 30 degrees C higher than baselines. That's almost 60 degrees above normal. Think about that. One more statement from this report. A temperature of 35.1 degrees Fahrenheit is forecast to hit the North Pole on February 2nd, 2025. North Pole, warmer than much of the lower 48. What's wrong with this picture? This should scare the hell out of you. If it doesn't, it should. Let's continue from this report. If temperatures keep rising rapidly, the anomaly compared to pre-industrial baselines may be higher than 3 degrees C, implying that humans are already functionally extinct. What does that mean, functionally extinct? It means that we're through the guardrail. Thelma and Louise moment, we are going to go to the bottom of the canyon. That's what this means. And yes, I use that image a lot because it's very clear, not hard to understand. And there are those that immediately knee-jerk label any such news as, quote, alarmist. So here's my question to them. When exactly should we be alarmed? The climate's collapsing, ozone layer's collapsing, crops are collapsing, fisheries are collapsing, forests are collapsing, global nuclear war is looming, and toxic weather warfare is raging in our skies. When exactly should we be alarmed if we're thinking rationally? Now here's the really bad news. Based on unfiltered frontline temperatures, we're already past 3.5 degrees C of temperature rise from pre-industrial baselines. That's almost 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And the current rate of thermal energy buildup is equal to the heat contained in 13 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs per second. About 10 years ago, it was 4 per second. Now it's 13. So think about that. And much of that heat has been transferred into the oceans, which is one of the reasons they're dying by the day. One chance we have, based on all available data. We must stop the intentional interference with the planet, the toxic interference with the planet, which is ubiquitously contaminating the entire world on top of all the other sources of contamination. Climate engineering is pounding the final nails into our collective coffins. If it continues, we are done. Now let's add this from theeconomist.com, aka disaster capitalist on a planet that will very soon be all but lifeless if we remain on the current course. Here's the headline: The Arctic, climate change's great economic opportunity. The report says an enormous prize is on offer. When might it be grasped? Question mark. Grasp the prize of an ice-free Arctic. Really? An ice-free Arctic that will then trigger the thawing of methane deposits that will then belch tens of millions of tons of methane into the atmosphere? It's already started. Search Siberian methane craters. Look carefully at the images and times that by 1,000 with an ice-free Arctic. Liberated methane that will saturate the atmosphere, covering the planet like a layer of glass. Heat gets in, but not out. Venus syndrome, game over. Climate intervention operations in the attempt to mask the problem to the moment of impact while also using weather as a covert weapon to control populations has radically accelerated the meltdown, not mitigated it. And the morons at theeconomist.com think the polar meltdown is, quote, a great economic opportunity. No. Eyes wide shut disaster capitalists like this have long since gone full retard. They don't have or want a clue about what's already unfolding at blinding speed. Yes, fully melted polar ice, aka blue ocean events, broken air conditioners of the planet. What a great opportunity for a one-way ticket off the planetary asylum for all of us. And if this happens, the entire web of life will go down with us. Moving on from the UK Guardian. Weather Watch, melting permafrost threatens landscapes and lives in Arctic regions. Take a look at the pictures. You don't need to know anything about some of the intricate science details. Look at the pictures of the melting permafrost and the collapsing structures and forests that are being affected by it. The Guardian article continues with this: towns and dams built on the assumptions that the surrounding ice would never melt are now facing disaster. SRM operations, solar radiation management operations, in the misguided attempt to mask polar meltdown have only made it worse by trapping more heat overall. And again, for the record, geoengineering operations are not and have never been for benevolent reasons, but rather to preserve the power and control of the predator-parasite class. From Scientific American, this headline: we're living in a dystopian climate thriller. It's time to rewrite the ending. End of headline. They say decades of threats were ignored about the threats from climate change and, even worse, climate engineering operations, which they don't state, of course, aka weather warfare. On that note, what's a foundational impact of climate disruption operations? Toxic weather and temperature whack-a-mole. Between October 2022 and April 2024, Pasadena, California observed its wettest 18-month period in 118 years of record keeping. Just 10 days later, it began its driest 9-month period ever recorded. Same equation was true of LA. Is this to ensure the total incineration of huge swaths of land, including homes and infrastructure? Same thing happened in Lahaina. A flash drought was declared a week before that incineration. And for the record, climate engineering operations are far more effective at diminishing, dispersing, and completely cutting off rainfall than augmenting it. How many know that? Please search and review the Engineering Wildfire section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn much, much more than most want to know. And now further north, Portland's dry January could tie record streak for no measurable rain. So what's scheduled next? Straight to snow, or so say some of the script-reading so-called meteorologists. So what's occurring again just before this winter storm, this nucleated winter storm? More air quality alerts throughout the Northwest. Why? Don't people think it's a little odd now that with incoming storms and the wind that's supposed to be with them and the clearing out of the air that there's air quality alerts? Because every time a storm's incoming over the Pacific Northwest and elsewhere, in the lead up to that, the skies are absolutely plastered, and it goes all the way out into the Pacific. They're chemically cooling that air mass to try to now cool the Pacific Northwest. And if you look at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration long lead forecasts, it looks absolutely ridiculous. So now what's scheduled is the southeastern U.S. that just got chemically frozen is supposed to immediately rebound to record heat, record warmth for winter. And the exact opposite in the Pacific Northwest, and the pendulum swings back and forth, and this has been the case for so many years. We've documented this so many times at geoengineeringwatch.org with maps that look meteorologically completely absurd, and nobody questions anything. The so-called meteorologists, the so-called experts that we're told to trust without question, they are simply either criminally ignorant of this profession in which we're told they're experts, or they're lying. One or the other. So again, as the current round of contaminated cloud cover and atmospheric moisture begin to close in on the U.S., the West Coast, an all-out spraying assault unfolded. Filth-filled skies interwoven with fresh geoengineering jet aircraft dispersions. So-called weather now is absolutely nothing even resembling that of the past. Nanoparticle-filled skies and lower layers of the atmosphere, poor visibility, and yes, as stated again a moment ago, pre-storm air quality alerts for the Pacific Northwest. What a surprise. How long can you hold your breath? Let's add this from science.org. It's titled Dust Devil. The report says climate change may be driving an expansion of valley fever, a deadly fungal infection spread by airborne spores. The fungus has recently been found as far north as Washington state. Imagine that. And modelers predict further spread. Dogs and humans are both at risk. They say modeling studies that incorporate climate change suggest the spread will continue. One idea, they say, is that these spores hitch a ride on wildfire smoke. Let's stop there. Question, do they mean the kind of smoke canopy that has jet spraying operations being conducted directly over the top of it, which geoengineeringwatch.org recorded time-lapse film footage directly above the Paradise Fire? You can see that on the dimming documentary available on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. And for the record, the tens of millions of tons of climate engineering nanoparticles being dispersed into our skies annually are ideal platforms for fungal proliferation. What a surprise. Moving on, chemically nucleated cloud moisture manifests in many forms from the Weather Channel, from fire to ice. Heavy hail falls in Hollywood Hills right after the fires, right? Also from the Weather Channel, heavy hail falls on burned LA area. I mentioned this earlier in this broadcast. From Yahoo News, rainstorm batters LA, threatening mudslides as residents return after wildfires. Does anyone find it interesting that now so often flooding rain or chemical hail comes immediately after blowtorch incinerations? Just another coincidence? From BBC, climate change made LA fires worse, scientists say. The science study authors noted that the LA wildfire season is getting longer while the rains that normally put out the blazes have reduced. Stop there. At least reduced until everything has already incinerated, and then, as I just covered, then the flooding rains come. BBC continues, the study linked the wildfires to what's termed climate whiplash. You hear that term a lot now, don't you? We've been using it at geoengineeringwatch.org for 15 years. The largest single factor creating whiplash events, period, climate engineering. How can this go on in our skies over societies that are supposedly intelligent and they don't know it? They don't know this is going on. How's that possible? What's wrong with this picture? Definitely on the wrong planet. I've felt that for a long time now, getting worse by the day. And how do the controllers stifle the conversation of weather warfare victims so that unwanted questions and answers don't come up during a lengthy trial? Easy. Just pay them off. New from The Guardian. Victims of deadly Hawaii wildfire agree on deal over how to split $4 billion payout. The report says lawyers avert trial after reaching agreement on how money should be dispersed 2 years after devastating fire. I truly grieve for the victims of the Lahaina fire and LA and so many more. But unless or until all of us stand together against the sea of insanity we're drowning in, it will only grow deeper. Remember, the controllers could not do what they do without the active or passive support of the majority population. Question, can the climate engineers alter the scheduled weather on short notice? Certainly. Here's a case in point from sfgate.com. Quote, really questionable Northern California rain forecast changes course. From that report, National Weather Service meteorologists earlier this week predicted that much-needed rain would finally fall upon the Bay Area, but now it appears that the promised wet weather is changing course and heading toward the Central Coast instead. Here's that headline again. Really questionable Northern California rain forecast changes course. Are they mocking us? Can the scheduled weather be changed back again? Or get a big dose of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding to flash cool the surface? Yes. Consider this new report from SFGate as well. Hazardous cold may bring temps as low as the mid-20s to Bay Area forecast. Just need some chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding and you get a cold, dense layer on the surface. That's how it works. And of course, there is the Southern California flash freeze that occurred again shortly after the apocalyptic incinerations. And there's this, more engineered weather whiplash from the Pinnacle Gazette. Siberian winter weather sees severe fluctuations, aka whiplash. The report says warm spells followed by extreme cold and heavy snowfall prompt emergency warnings across Siberia. Whiplash, record warm, record cold, back to record warm. There's nothing natural about this. And the cold is coming from chemical ice nucleation operations. Without that, we would not have those flash surface freezes, and we certainly wouldn't have blizzards in New Orleans. And the chemical flash freezes are wiping out what little is left of wildlife. Here's a case in point that I've mentioned before. In the Arctic, massive caribou herds, once over 1 million in number, have starved to death, reducing their numbers to only a few thousand in many cases. They're unable to dig through the chemical ice nucleation crust in order to reach the forage below. And this is just a single example. How many ever stop to consider what's unfolding? How many stop to care? If it isn't yet clear, all that we hold dear is in the balance. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 495, February 1st, 2025. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. I want to express my deepest gratitude to those that are courageously marching forward in this fight against stiff resistance from many who refuse to open their eyes and look through a clear lens. It's our collective efforts of the awakened that can still make a difference. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. This is the one-stop tool for briefing people on this most dire issue. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to the dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of the dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. We also have the dimming posted on Rumble. Keep that in mind. And about reaching those that still aren't looking up. Here's one way. Start a conversation. Geoengineering Watch awareness raising materials can be found on our homepage. Again, our only goal, provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high quality, full color, printed materials, 100-pound paper, shocking images. If our 20-page 6x9 booklets don't wake somebody up, don't waste your time. Move along. They'll have to wake up when they're ready. We do also have Geoengineering Watch hoodies and shirts. Photos of both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards. You can go straight to the dimming from those cards, and nobody refuses those cards. They're very effective and very easy to carry. Bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Again, we must reach a critical mass. That's when all the wheels turn. That's when the families of those participating realize what their family member is participating in, and that is the only chance we have of stopping these operations from the inside out. We can expose it, we can stop it. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send us your photo so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation. That's part of our materials page. Images like this encourage others to make their voices heard while it can still make a difference. And again, to all those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering insanity in spite of stiff resistance, often from family and former friends, I know what that's about. Believe me. But I thank you for your courage, for standing against that resistance. You have my deepest gratitude forever. Moving on, I want to bounce back to the engineered winter Gulf Coast for more detail, because this event is so blatant, so glaring, that many are beginning to wake up to something being radical wrong. And the fog that precedes some of these cool downs, again, that's also a direct result of chemical ice nucleating operations and that cold layer that hits the ground that's far warmer than it should be. And we have very dense fog scenarios occurring, and many people reporting getting sick from that fog and whatever is falling through that fog from what's being dispersed above. This headline from the Big Easy magazine, quote, "Unprecedented blizzard in Louisiana, a harsh reality, they say, of climate change." Follow me through with this, because this is just more climate engineering cover-up. The report says, in a state renowned for its humid subtropical climate, the recent blizzard that blanketed Louisiana in ice and snow, a phenomenon unseen since the 1800s, unseen in human record keeping, let's tell it like it is, has sparked heated debates about the validity of climate change. Some critics have seized upon this rare event as evidence against global warming. I spoke about that earlier, didn't I? All those that often deny climate engineering, then they thus use a chemically engineered event like this as proof of their completely incorrect ideology of global cooling on a planet that's in total meltdown. And that's exactly what this article is acknowledging. That these people seized upon this rare event as evidence against global warming, arguing that such extreme cold disproves the notion of a warming planet. Don't look anywhere besides your own doorstep or the lower 48 or the eastern half of the lower 48, which is about 1.5% of the Earth's surface area. Is that indicative of the state of the entire planet? I think not. These people don't look at what's happening in the far north, do they? They only find something to support their completely incorrect ideology, and that harms the climate engineering cause, and that's definitely a problem for all of us. The report then says, however, this argument reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of climate science. Now, this article is definitely going off the rails. So-called climate science. Let's follow through with this. Far from debunking climate change, Louisiana's historic blizzard underscores its existence and severity. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. A rapidly warming planet doesn't create freak flash cooling events. Climate engineering does. Chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations do. Blizzards in Texas, New Orleans, and Florida is a glaring red flag of climate engineering. And let's not forget, the blizzards took place while there were well above freezing temperatures and rain in Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, Siberia, Moscow, Think about that. The Big Easy magazine continues with this. Critics of climate change often point to unusual cold weather as a supposed contradiction of the concept of global warming. Both parties are wrong in this case, because those who claim these events are natural, supporting their completely false global cooling narrative, are completely off track. And those who pretend that somehow global warming creates flash cooling events, also off track. Both parties. More than enough denial to go around here. I've stated that so many times. The scientific community, the report says, has repeatedly warned that climate change is not solely about warming temperatures. Instead, it involves disruption of long-standing climate patterns, leading to more extreme and unpredictable weather, including heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, and yes, they say even unpredictable snowstorms in the deep south. That is so patently false. There is nothing natural about what happened in the deep south. Not that what we've done to the planet besides climate engineering is natural. It's not. It's not. And people who claim that what's happening on the planet is natural cycles, also completely clueless. Again, this example. If you run someone over in a crosswalk, then beat them, burn them, stab them, do you think you're going to convince a court that they died of a heart attack and it wasn't your fault? Really? We have laid waste to this planet. There's nothing natural about the earth changes that are happening. And then stack climate engineering on top of that. There's nothing natural about any of this. And the criminal climate science community pretending that climate engineering isn't the core part of these flash freeze equations. These people should be held legally and morally accountable by a justifiably enraged population. And I live for the day when this issue is fully out in the open and the fur flies. It's not just all those who actually participated in the climate engineering operations that should be held legally and morally accountable in a court of law, but all those who participated in the criminal cover-up of the same. There's no difference. They're all a part of it. Again, for the record, any discussion of climate, anything from any perspective that doesn't include the climate engineering issue first and foremost is deception and disinformation. On that theme, from so-called Scientific American, here's what caused the rare record Florida snow. They say a perfect confluence of Arctic air outbreak and a low-pressure system that pulled in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, the record warm Gulf of Mexico, by the way, brought rare record snow to the Gulf Coast. Right. That makes perfect sense because record blizzards always come from record warmth, right? Not so much. Side note. Even self-proclaimed internet truth tellers are actually engaged, again, in pumping out total disinformation by propagating the patently false narrative that the freak flash freezes and chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding so-called snowstorms in places like the Gulf Coast that happen from moisture off the record warm Gulf of Mexico are just the result of natural cycles. That's called climate engineering cover-up. Same sources commonly push the products of their sponsors during their climate engineering cover-up videos, or they're rattling a tin cup for your money because they're telling people what they want to hear. Nothing wrong, nothing to see here, all natural. It'll just work itself out magically. And how's that going? Again, the earth changes taking place have absolutely nothing to do with natural cycle, anything. And about the damage being done to what's left of wildlife, this new report from the Weather Channel. Why is Florida raining iguanas? ? They say these cold-blooded critters tumble from trees during chilly Florida weather. Is this a joke to these people, to the climate engineering cover-up actors at the Weather Channel, that these poor reptiles topple out of trees and smack the ground? Is that a joke to them? Here's another headline from the Weather Channel, climate engineering cover-up criminals. A recent winter storm sent temperatures plummeting across Gulf Coast below freezing, causing potentially deadly conditions for sea turtles in coastal areas. Here's the bottom line. From iguanas to turtles and everything in between, chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding, surface flash freezes are killing off what little is left of the web of life. How is this okay? How is this not all-out weather and biological warfare? How are so many so absolutely clueless and oblivious to what's taking place around the world? And to acknowledge climate engineering operations and how radically they are affecting the biosphere is not a denial of all other forms of human damage to the planet, or at least it shouldn't be. And those that are denying the other forms are harming the climate engineering cause because you lose all credibility. Every form of human activity that affects the energy balance of the planet is a part of the problem. Climate engineering just happens to be the biggest, most toxic, and most destructive of all, by far. But it's an all-the-above scenario. And about those that don't seem to care what's going on in our skies, the moment the food market shelves start to empty out, they'll care. But too late. And that moment draws near. Wait and see. Here's another wildlife red flag. New from Fox News. Super pod of more than 1,500 dolphins off California coast captured on drone video. But wait, this must be great news, right? So many dolphins in one group must mean they're doing wonderfully well. Except that couldn't be further from the truth. Dolphins are highly intelligent. They are gathering together out of desperation. There are already over 500 rapidly expanding dead zones around the world. Fisheries are collapsing everywhere. We're hurtling toward what's known as Canfield Ocean. I've mentioned this many times. Please look it up. Superheated, lifeless, oxygen-depleted, stratified, dead seas everywhere. Oceans die, we die. Very simple. These are all very alarming harbingers. Moving on, here's an important footnote from the bottom of the world in New Zealand, where it's the middle of summer. This new headline from Ground News. Definitely a little unusual, the headline states. Summer snow surprises South Island of New Zealand. Been there, spent considerable time there. Summer snow is falling across the South Island. The report states, and yes, never mind, that the North Pole, again, is warmer than the New Zealand summer. Nothing to see here. Move along. North Pole, start of February, is forecast to be well above freezing. Think about that. Almost 60 degrees above normal. Moving on, more burn downs from Newsweek. What did mainstream Matrix TV omit from their fire coverage? NASA images reveal massive fires in Baja California, another place I've spent a lot of time. As wildfires in Los Angeles begin to subside, Baja California, just south of the U.S.-Mexican border, faced its own wave of devastating blazes. The fires in Baja California closely resembled those in Los Angeles. How many people know that? Hot, dry, gusty, descending from inland mountain winds and severe drought conditions have created a perfect environment for wildfires to ignite rapidly and spread uncontrollably. This is exactly the kind of conditions specifically cited in a U.S. document titled Forest Fires as a Military Weapon. 140 pages long, posted in its entirety under the Engineering Wildfires section at geoengineeringwatch.org. Take a look. You won't like what you find. Moving on to North Carolina, where the suffering continues in so many forms. From AccuWeather, Climate Engineering Cover-Up Agency. Wildfires ravage North Carolina regions, still reeling from Hurricane Helene and the flash freezes that happened in between right after Helene. One blow after another after another. The report says firefighters scrambled to contain a wildfire that forced evacuations in parts of western North Carolina. But again, what's the overall big picture? In spite of the constant chemical ice nucleation and cloud seeding assault. From the Weather Network, global temperature records smashed despite record cold snap. It says we just lived through a full week of the world's warmest temperatures ever observed during the middle of January. Brutally cold temperatures blanketing North America over the past week have made it seem like the whole world is frozen in place. And that's exactly why the climate engineers do that. That's exactly why, to create that impression. The report then says, despite our own polar plunge, chemical ice nucleation, the world at large just broke a whole week's worth of temperature records for the middle of January, a remarkable feat that speaks to the level of anomalous warmth surrounding the globe despite North America's recent chill. The most anomalously less warm region in the entire world, eastern half of North American lower 48, most consistently less warm since 2012 overall. That's not nature. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's the result of, by far, the world's most funded and largest military with 3 times more aerial tanker aircraft than all other militaries in the world combined. Connect the dots. They say this latest stretch of global warmth was driven by extremely warm temperatures in places like the Arctic, including Alaska and Siberia, already covered that, as well as portions of Eastern Asia, Northeastern Africa, and large swaths of Antarctica, all far above normal temperatures. But you'd never know because there's a blizzard in New Orleans. I'm almost out of time in this on-air radio broadcast that we post online. I want to blow through a few headlines. They can be looked up online. First, from Clean Technica, this report: global surface temperatures are rising faster now than at any time in the past 485 million years. That's a bit scary. Should be. Climate engineering making it worse, not better. From phys.org, we live in times of multiple intertwined crises, but our policy responses aren't keeping up. No, they're making it worse because climate engineering is a part of that equation, adding fuel to the fire. From the UK Daily Mail, villages are submerged and roads become rivers as France is hit by devastating floods. And there's this: more than half the largest bodies of water in the world, talking about freshwater bodies, are drying up. That's from Discover Magazine. From Nature.com, deepening water scarcity in breadbasket nations. From Bloomberg.com, oceans are warming faster and faster as the Earth traps more energy. Climate engineering, a big part of that equation as well. From Ecowatch.com, Spanish fishers in Galicia say shellfish stocks are completely collapsing due to climate change. Much more to that equation. The intense UV radiation from the destroyed ozone layer because of climate engineering, big part of that equation as well. Here's a side note from Radio Iowa: ice fishing season melting away with record warm temperatures. From SciTech Daily, new research exposes, quote, astonishing glacier loss in global warming hotspots. From AccuWeather, this is very important: coral bleaching on Australia's Great Barrier Reef reaches catastrophic levels. It's done. Amazon, also done. Planets imploding, and so many still asleep at the wheel. And what's the power doing? They're preparing in their own way, and that doesn't benefit us. There's this from the FBI website, fbi.gov: large-scale nuclear training exercise to take place in New York. The report continues: the training exercise will not pose any risk to area residents. The public does not need to be alarmed by training-related activity, including the presence of military personnel in aircraft and people in protective equipment. Question: is it just a coincidence that just such training exercises seem to take place shortly before the actual event? You decide. Next, forgive me for belating this point, but it's very important to understand. So many of the self-proclaimed environmental left have been very successfully programmed to believe that anyone who tries to bring attention to the climate engineering issue is somehow denying all other forms of human damage to the planet. As individuals, we must ensure that we don't fuel this false dichotomy. Anyone that is actually trying to help in the fight against climate engineering should readily admit that industrialized, militarized so-called society has trashed the planet at blinding speed. But yes, here is the but. How can there be any legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost acknowledging and addressing the climate engineering elephant in the equation? Taking this approach is correct. It's reasonable, it's rational, and it helps to build bridges instead of burning them. From CollapseCurriculum.com, collapse or extinction, the unholy double bind of the 21st century. Yes, with each passing day, the human race is indeed choosing. This includes choosing to do nothing, which is also a choice. Imagine you're a doctor treating a terminally ill patient. The patient or their family must choose between option one, prolonging the patient's life through aggressive treatments, which causes severe pain and suffering. Option two, withholding treatments to allow the patient to die sooner, potentially alleviating suffering but hastening death. This is what is sometimes called a double bind, a situation where all possible actions seem to lead to morally or practically unacceptable outcomes. And today, humans face a double bind of existential proportions for the entire species and millions of other species. Put simply, we must choose between option one, prolonging human civilization through aggressive extraction, production, and resource use, which causes severe environmental degradation that breaches a point of no return, making the planet mostly or entirely uninhabitable, leading to the extinction of the human species and millions of other species. And there is option two, ushering the collapse of industrialized, militarized, so-called civilization before the planet's remaining life support systems are damaged beyond any recovery. Bottom line, the planet is broken. We don't just face global warming or just, quote, climate change. What's unfolding is far worse and far more immediate. Abrupt climate collapse. And though there are countless factors in this equation, global climate disruption operations are the single most destructive, and that's saying a lot. Decide not to be like those that choose denial over truth, apathy over action. The same core cancer of control is orchestrating everything from climate engineering to conflict zones and the matrix media that does their best to spin the truth on all of it. For far too many, sustaining the status quo for as long as possible is all that matters. Such a mindset refuses to recognize the cost that will soon be paid if we remain on the current course, planetary omnicide. We are almost out of time. The time to make a difference is now. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please make your voice heard while it can still make a difference. The clock is running down far faster than almost any yet understand. Stay strong. Never yield to the insanity, ever. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.